Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Hope and Coffee. I'm Hope and Coffee holding down the fort today, and it is absolutely gorgeous outside. We are having a pretty good day, and even though it's a Monday, and we have a lot of things going on this week, a lot of things to have to do, um, I think today is just absolutely beautiful, and I wanted to take time to sit here and talk with you all just a little bit. We are starting to reach the end of September, and I am just flabbergasted with how fast this month has gone. And I started to realize as I was making some notes about episodes to schedule, things to record for you all, things I wanted to talk about, that I have not done a deep dive question in probably about a month. I could not believe that I intended to do these like maybe once a week or every other week, like a little deep dive question, and I had 20 of them. Still have 20 of them, but apparently I'm doing one now. So this is deep dive question number 2. And I find this one a little bit harder to answer than even the first one. And the first one, if you want to go back and find it, deep dive question number 1 was, are people inherently good or bad? And that is on another episode. You are welcome to go find it. Please do. But this is deep dive question number 2. And the purpose of the deep dive questions is to be not only honest with myself, but to be honest with you all, to help you all start a conversation with yourself, with me, with whoever it may be. But deep dive questions are meant to be hard. They are meant to be tough to answer. They are not meant to have a right answer. They are meant to spur those conversations, trigger thoughts, trigger just just I guess a deeper connection to yourself, if that's a good way to put it. But this one's a hard one for me to talk about, and I will tell you why. Because deep dive question number 2 is, what is the hardest thing you've ever had to do? And that is tough because I know exactly what it is. And I've actually been sitting here thinking about it for probably a few weeks before when I wrote it down as a topic that I wanted to talk about. I pretty much knew when I wrote it down what that answer was. And I'll be honest, the hardest thing that I ever had to do was to be the one to take a step away from my marriage, to get in my car and to drive across country to LA, to leave Chicago, and to try to figure out what I needed for myself. That was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It took me 3 days to drive across country. Argos was the best little passenger. He pretty much slept the whole time. We stopped in, I want to say it was like Oklahoma City. Then one of my coworkers, his wife, like he was in Pakistan at the time. He was actually the one who replaced me while I was out there. So he was out there. His wife and daughter lived in Denver. So stayed with them out there whenever I drove to that area. Went to sorry, not LA, Las Vegas. Stayed out there, went to a Cirque du Soleil show. Honestly, didn't really find just a ton of things in Vegas to do. Like maybe if I had a group of friends or something, I don't know, but I'm not really a gambler. Tried a buffet, not super great. There was a Hello Kitty food truck. Very excited about that. That was probably the highlight of the whole thing, that and the Cirque du Soleil. So those two things. It was a very artsy sort of hotel room that each room was based on a different artist, but still, very emotional sort of drive. Honestly, driving across country, knowing that I'm making this big change, knowing that I'm not just changing my life, but someone else's life as well as I'm doing this drive, and that maybe it's the wrong choice, and maybe I'm going to regret it. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do to make that choice because not that I'm adverse to change, but it's easy to stay in a situation that you're comfortable in. And it's easy to stay in a situation where you still love the person. And I did. I still do. I think he is a fantastic individual. Love him to death. However, there just became a point where I felt like we weren't growing together as a couple and in our marriage. And I also felt like we weren't doing each other any benefits by staying where we were. And it was very hard because I needed someone who could be supportive of me as I was going through some mental health things. And when I would try to ask for that, I didn't feel like I was getting any support. And that's hard because it was not a time in my life I felt like I could do it alone, but ultimately I was doing it alone. And I think that was the point where I realized, well, if I need to do it alone, then I really have to be alone to go through it. And so I did. I tried. And it was very hard. Being in LA was really not the best decision for me. It was not the greatest location. I will say probably the best thing about LA was Disneyland and the beaches, even though the beaches were hard to get to, even though I lived like in West Hollywood, it still took me 35, 45 minutes to an hour to drive over to the beach just due to the traffic and just the absolute nightmare of the streets. Disneyland, on the other hand, absolutely magical. Loved it. Yeah, kind of expensive, but honestly, worth it. And everything was just so overpriced out there. But I needed something that felt like change. I needed something that I felt like I was finally doing on my own. Up until that point in my life, I felt like I had always had, I gave myself a safety net. And that was like the one point in my life I had no safety net. I had nothing to fall back on. I was thousands of miles pretty much away from my closest family members that I could kind of go to if I needed to. And I was in the middle of a pandemic pretty soon after I got there. So it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And yeah, there were absolutely days I regretted it. There were absolutely days that I felt like I made the wrong choice. But over time, I realized it was probably the better choice I could have made for myself. If maybe I could have not gone to LA, maybe I could have gone somewhere else and maybe had a slightly better experience. But overall, like, I needed that time to kind of establish myself as an individual when I had pretty much gone directly from my parents' house into the house I shared with him in kind of that husband and wife capacity, and I had never been fully on my own as an individual. I had never lived by myself, and it was just me and Argos, and we were doing the best we could. So it was hard. It was a struggle. There were lots of like very tearful nights and days, lots of therapy. But you know what? We made it. And I'm happy to say that even though it was the hardest thing I've ever done, no, I do not wish it upon anyone, and I do not recommend it on anyone. No, absolutely not. And I never want to go through it again. No. I will say that at that time in my life, it was probably the better choice I could have made. I think there are things I could have done differently. I think there are better ways I could have gone about it, but I did not have the emotional, knowledge. I did not have the emotional capacity to know what those things were at the time. And I thought at the time I was doing what I needed to do, and it wasn't until I used hindsight later on and a couple years down the road that I realized there are a couple things I could have done differently that probably could have made it a little bit different, a little bit easier for all parties involved. But anyway, that is my deep dive question number 2. You do not have to answer that down below, but if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to leave those down below. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, share, what have you, and we will see you, me, and maybe the little guys on the next page, and have a great one. Bye.